This is a story about a betrayal so brutal it could break a person, or in one woman's case, it could forge a weapon. It all went down in the swanky high-end circles of Sydney, a place where people's secrets are as well guarded as their designer handbags. The truth, as they say, stings. But for one woman, it was the fire she needed to rise from the ashes. A year ago, Aurelia Vance lived what looked like a perfect life. At 32, she was the quintessential picture of Sydney's high society, her golden hair catching the sunlight over Bondi Beach, her steel blue eyes holding a sharp intelligence that few saw beyond her role as a loving wife. Her penthouse in the Rocks, with its sweeping views of the Harbor Bridge and the Opera House, was a sanctuary of good taste. Every piece of furniture hand-picked during her trips across Europe and Asia. She was the perfect partner to her husband, Lachlan King, a real estate mogul who'd reshaped the city's skyline with his luxury developments. But behind the facade of the devoted wife lay a woman with a past she'd kept secret, even from her husband. Every morning, she'd follow the same routine. Wake at 6, make a flat white, and read the sports section of the Sydney Morning Herald to keep up with Lachlan's footy obsessions. Then, she'd retreat to her private study, where she'd secretly work on financial consultations for small, family-run businesses. It was her rebellion against the trophy wife role society expected her to play. Lachlan would leave every day at 8 sharp, always immaculate in his bespoke suits, kissing her on the forehead, with the distracted air of a man whose mind was already on the day's meetings. "My love," he'd say, "remember we have dinner at the Murdochs tonight." And she'd nod, smile, and promise to have the right dress and the right conversation ready. For the first few years, Aurelia found a certain charm in this ritual. Lachlan was everything a woman could want: handsome, successful, and sophisticated. But over time, the cracks began to show. He started coming home later. His excuses became vaguer, and their intimacy faded into routine gestures and superficial conversations about the social calendar. Aurelia put it down to the stress of business in a competitive market. The first alarm bell rang one Tuesday in March when Aurelia decided to surprise Lachlan with lunch at his office in Barangaroo, the financial district where his company occupied 3 floors of a sleek glass skyscraper. His secretary, a seasoned woman named Judith, greeted her with an oddly awkward expression. "Mrs. King," she said, avoiding eye contact. "Mr. King is in a very important meeting. Maybe you should come back later." But Aurelia knew that office like the back of her hand. She knew when he had a truly important meeting, his business partner's car would be in its reserved spot in the underground car park. That day, it was empty. Aurelia insisted on going in, and after a moment that felt like forever, Judith led her to the executive office. Lachlan was there alone, standing in front of the windows that offered a panoramic view of the harbor, talking on the phone in a low voice, and with an intimate laugh that Aurelia hadn't heard directed at her in months. When he saw her, he abruptly hung up, slid the phone into his jacket pocket, and walked over to kiss her, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "My love, what a nice surprise. What brings you here?" Aurelia noticed the perfume. It wasn't hers. It was younger, sweeter, with notes of vanilla and jasmine that clung to her husband's silk tie like a territorial mark. She said nothing. She convinced herself it was paranoia, that 8 years of a solid marriage couldn't fall apart over a phone call and an unknown scent. Over the next few weeks, Aurelia began to observe with a detective's eye. Calls Lachlan would take on the balcony when he thought she couldn't hear him. Text messages that would arrive late at night, which he'd check with a secret smile. Gifts he bought that never came home. Receipts from jewelers. Bills from restaurants they'd never dined at together. and charges on his credit card from boutiques she'd never visited. The perfect world Aurelia had built started to sway like a house of cards in a Sydney storm. But she didn't know the storm was just beginning, and that the coming revelation would not only destroy her marriage, but force her to confront who she really was and what she was made of. On lonely nights, while Lachlan invented increasingly elaborate excuses for not coming home, Aurelia would stay awake at the window of their penthouse, watching the city lights twinkle like fallen stars. Unbeknownst to her, she was preparing for the moment she'd have to choose between sinking into humiliation or emerging as the woman she had been before she became someone else's perfect wife. The glass princess was about to discover she was made of something far stronger than glass. She was made of diamond, and diamonds, under the right pressure, become unbreakable. The truth unveiled. The truth hit like a tsunami one afternoon in April. Aurelia decided to do something she hadn't done in years. She followed her husband. She was a spy in a Hollywood flick, dressed in dark jeans, a black leather jacket, and sunglasses. Her heart was pounding as she followed Lachlan's gray Maserati through the city streets. She followed him past the Opera House, through the Botanic Gardens, until he arrived at a sleek residential building in Elizabeth Bay that she didn't recognize. From her car, she watched Lachlan enter the building with a chilling familiarity. Aurelia waited for an hour that felt like an eternity, her hands sweating on the steering wheel as she tried to make sense of what she was seeing. Maybe it was a business meeting. Maybe the building had offices. Maybe she was just a paranoid, jealous wife. But then she saw her. Zara Davies, 24 years old, with platinum blonde hair, long legs and a miniskirt that cost more than most people's weekly wages. She was everything Aurelia had been 10 years earlier. Young, stunning, with the arrogant confidence of someone who believes the world belongs to them. Lachlan emerged from the building 5 minutes later, and what Aurelia saw next destroyed 8 years of marriage in 30 seconds. Her husband kissed that woman with a desperate passion, with his hands tangled in her blonde hair, pressing her against the building's glass door. It was the same way he'd kissed her on their honeymoon in Port Douglas, when she believed their love was eternal and unbreakable. Tears came unannounced, blinding her, as she watched her husband get into the woman's car, a red convertible BMW that screamed youth and rebellion. They drove off together, laughing, with their hands intertwined on the gear stick, like a pair of lovers in a romantic movie. Aurelia sat in her car for hours, watching the life she had built disintegrate before her eyes. When she finally got home, Lachlan was already there, showered, perfumed, with a glass of Shiraz in his hand and a perfectly practiced look of innocence. "My love," he said, "how was your day?" "Mine was exhausting. Those Japanese investors are ruthless." Aurelia looked at him as if seeing him for the first time. This man, who had shared her bed for 8 years, was lying to her face. "What's her name?" she asked in a voice she didn't recognize. Lachlan's expression of confusion was perfect. "Who's who, my love?" "The blonde in the red convertible BMW you kiss like a hormonal teenager." The silence that followed was deafening. The mask of innocence fell from his face, replaced by a look of guilt that confirmed all her worst fears. "Aurelia, I can explain," he stammered. 8 years, she yelled, her voice raw. 8 years of my life, Lachlan. 8 years believing we were happy, that we had something real, that you loved me like I loved you. Tears streamed down her face. How long has it been going on? How long have you been laughing at me behind my back? Lachlan reached out with his hands, as if approaching a wounded animal. My love, it's not what you think. It's complicated. You don't understand the pressure I'm under with the business. What did you need? Aurelia roared. Did you need to humiliate me? Did you need to make me the idiot wife Who doesn't realize her husband is banging a 24-year-old floozy? The crude, vulgar word hung in the air between them. Lachlan recoiled, perhaps for the first time in their marriage, feeling a real fear of the woman he had lived with for 8 years. "Aurelia, please, can we talk about this like civilized adults?" "Civilized?" She laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "You want to talk about civilized while your mistress is using my money to buy designer clothes? 'Cause I recognize that skirt, Lachlan. It's from the new Prada collection. It costs $3,000, the same $3,000 that went missing from our joint account last month, and that you said was for entertainment expenses." Lachlan's face turned ashen. There was no denying that. The days that followed were a descent into hell. Aurelia hired a private detective, an old mate named Marco, who had worked for Sydney's most powerful families for decades. The photographs he handed her a week later were like daggers to the heart. Lachlan and Zara at exclusive restaurants, luxury hotels, on weekend trips he'd claimed were work conferences. But what hurt the most wasn't the images of infidelity. It was the intimacy. The way Lachlan looked at that woman, the way he'd whisper in her ear, making her laugh with genuine joy, the way he touched her with a reverence Aurelia had believed was exclusively hers. Marco also gave her devastating financial information. Lachlan had been diverting money from their personal and business accounts to support Zara. A flat in Elizabeth Bay, a red convertible BMW, jewelry, clothes, trips. In total, he had spent over $300,000 on his mistress in 6 months, money that included part of the inheritance Aurelia had received from her grandparents and which she had invested in her husband's business years ago. But the biggest humiliation came when she discovered that all of Sydney's social elite already knew. At a dinner at the Versace's place, Aurelia caught the looks of pity, the hushed whispers, the fake smiles of women who had been her friends for years. She was the cuckolded wife of the season, the favorite gossip of the ladies who lunched in Double Bay. One night, after a week of not sleeping, not eating, and crying herself dry, Aurelia found herself standing in front of her marble bathroom mirror, really seeing herself for the first time in years. She saw a 32-year-old woman who had sacrificed her ambitions, her dreams, her identity, to become the perfect accessory for a man who had betrayed her in the cruelest way possible. But in that moment of absolute pain, something changed in her eyes. A spark was lit deep within her, a flame that had been dormant for years. Aurelia Vance, the woman who had existed before she became Lachlan King's wife, was starting to wake up. And when she woke up completely, the world of everyone who had underestimated her would tremble. The transformation begins. The transformation began in a small, hidden cafe in Newtown, far from the places where Aurelia might run into someone from her social circle. It was a rainy Tuesday in May, and she had left home aimlessly, needing to escape the walls of her penthouse, which had become a prison of painful memories. She sat at a corner table, ordered a double espresso, and took out her phone to make the call she had been putting off for weeks. Her fingers trembled as she dialed the number she had memorized, but hadn't used in 5 years. "Hello?" A female voice with a British accent answered. "Victoria," Aurelia said, her voice hoarse. "It's me, it's Aurelia." The silence on the other end lasted an eternity before Victoria Thornfield, her former partner and best friend from Harvard, replied with a mix of shock and joy. "My God, Aurelia, I haven't heard from you in 5 years. What's happened? Are you okay?" Tears welled up as Aurelia told her everything. Victoria listened without interrupting, occasionally murmuring words of support or outrage when the details of the betrayal became particularly cruel. "That bastard," Victoria muttered when Aurelia finished her story. "Aurelia, love, do you know what you have to do?" "No," Aurelia confessed, feeling lost. "I don't know anything. I've been living like a China doll for so many years that I don't remember who I was before all this. Are you kidding me?" Victoria let out a laugh that sounded both amused and incredulous. "Don't you remember who you were at Harvard? Don't you remember what you did with Blackstone Capital when everyone said we were too young, too ambitious, too female to make it on Wall Street?" Aurelia closed her eyes, and for the first time in years, she let the memories come back. Aurelia Montgomery, before she became Aurelia King. The girl from country Victoria who had arrived at Harvard Business School on a scholarship, with no connections, no prestigious name, just a fierce intelligence and an ambition that scared her male professors. The young woman who, with Victoria, had created an investment fund that had generated a 300% return in its first year. "I remember," she whispered, feeling something stir in her chest, as if a part of her that had been in hibernation was waking up. "Good," Victoria said firmly, "because I have a proposition for you. Guess where I am now?" "In London?" "Nah, love, I'm in Sydney. I've been here for the last 6 months, setting up the Aussie office of Thornfield International. And guess what? I need a partner. I need someone who understands the local market, who has connections, who is a genius at international finance. I need my old Harvard partner back." Aurelia's heart began to beat faster. "Victoria, I haven't worked in years. I'm not sure I can." "Bullshit," Victoria interrupted with a directness Aurelia remembered and had missed. "Your brain doesn't go rusty, Aurelia. Your instincts don't just disappear. Besides, I've got a hunch you're about to be more motivated than you've ever been in your entire life." That night, Aurelia returned to her penthouse with a purpose. She went straight to her private study, opened the drawers she had kept locked for years, and pulled out her diplomas, her financial certifications, her professional contacts from before the marriage. Everything was there, waiting for her, like weapons of war she had stored away for a moment just like this. The final showdown. For the next week, Aurelia worked like a woman possessed. While Lachlan continued his routine of lies, she researched, planned, and prepared her counterattack. But it wouldn't be an emotional or hysterical one. It would be far more devastating. It would be professional, calculated, lethal. The first thing she did was hire Sydney's best divorce lawyer, Donatella Ricci, a 60-year-old woman who had decimated the fortunes of more unfaithful men than she could count. Donatella reviewed the documents Marco the detective had collected and smiled with the satisfaction of a shark smelling blood in the water. "My dear," she told Aurelia, "your husband has made every possible mistake. Documented adultery, misuse of marital funds, using marital assets to support his mistress. He's going to lose everything, and you're going to come out of this not only with your dignity intact, but significantly richer." But Aurelia had plans that went far beyond divorce. She began meeting Victoria in secret, working late into the night in dark cafes and temporary offices, rebuilding the skills she had let rust away. Victoria had brought her a proposal that was perfect in its poetic symmetry. Thornfield International was interested in acquiring one of Lachlan's most important property developments, a luxury complex in Barangaroo that had been his pride and joy for the last 3 years. But the offer wouldn't come directly from Victoria. It would come through a new company Aurelia was about to create, using the financial contacts she had developed over years of attending charity galas and business dinners as a trophy wife. "Do you understand what this means?" Victoria asked her one night as they worked on the final details of the proposal. "You're not just divorcing him. You're buying him out. You're becoming his boss." Aurelia felt an icy smile form on her lips. "Nah," she said softly. "I'm going to become his worst nightmare." But before executing her master plan, she had to do something she had been putting off for weeks. She had to confront Zara Davies. The time had come for the mistress to find out exactly who she had messed with. The opportunity came one Friday afternoon when Marco informed her that Zara had an appointment at the most exclusive beauty salon in Double Bay. Aurelia dressed carefully for the encounter. An Armani charcoal gray pantsuit, Louboutin heels, her hair in an impeccable bun, makeup flawless but imposing. She looked like what she was about to become, a formidable businesswoman. She entered the salon with a confidence that made every head turn. Zara was in a pedicure chair, her eyes closed, enjoying a spa treatment that probably cost more than the weekly wage of the beautician attending to her. "Excuse me," Aurelia said to the beautician. "Could you give me a moment alone with Ms. Davies? It's a personal matter." The beautician, intimidated by Aurelia's authoritative presence, quickly retreated. Zara opened her eyes, and her face instantly paled as she recognized the woman she had been seeing in society photos for months. "You must be Zara," Aurelia said in a soft voice that held unsaid threats. "I'm Aurelia, the wife." Zara tried to keep her composure, but Aurelia could see the terror in her eyes. "Mrs. King, I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything," Aurelia interrupted, approaching until she was just inches from the pedicure chair. "Just listen to me very carefully. You've had a lot of fun these past few months, haven't you? Living like a princess with my husband's money, feeling special because you managed to hold the attention of a married man." Zara opened her mouth to protest, but Aurelia raised a hand to silence her. "But there's something my dear Lachlan hasn't told you, has he? He hasn't told you who I really am. He hasn't told you that before I was his trophy wife, I was one of the most successful financiers on Wall Street. He hasn't told you that the money he's spending on you isn't just his. A considerable part of it comes from my investments, my inheritance, and the businesses I helped build before I made the mistake of falling in love." Aurelia leaned in closer, and Zara could smell her expensive perfume, feel the authority that radiated from her every pore. "You know what else he hasn't told you? That his company is about to face the biggest crisis in its history. You see, little Zara, I know all his financial secrets. I know exactly how much he owes, who he owes it to, and what's going to happen when his creditors realize he's been diverting money to support his little darling." The color completely drained from Zara's face. You can't do that. You can't ruin him." Aurelia straightened up and smiled with a chilling coldness. "Oh, my dear girl, I don't need to ruin him. He already did that all by himself. I'm just going to make sure that when everything falls apart, I'm on the right side of the devastation. And you, little princess, are about to find out what it feels like when the man you thought would support you forever can't even afford his own coffee." She turned to leave, but stopped at the salon door. "Oh, and Zara," she said, without turning around. "Enjoy that pedicure. It's the last one Lachlan will be able to pay for." That night, Aurelia returned to her penthouse with a sense of power she hadn't experienced in years. For the first time since she had discovered the infidelity, she didn't cry. Instead, she opened a bottle of Penfolds Grange from Lachlan's private reserve, poured herself a generous glass, and toasted the woman who was about to rise from the ashes of her destroyed marriage. The next day, she put the final phase of her plan into motion. With Victoria as financial backing and herself as the public face of the operation, they created Vance International, an investment firm specializing in hostile acquisitions of distressed real estate properties. The first target, King Development Corporation. Aurelia had spent years listening to Lachlan's business conversations, memorizing names, contacts, and financial weaknesses. She knew exactly what the vulnerable points of his company were, which investors were nervous, and which loans were coming due. Using a network of contacts she had cultivated over years of charity galas and social dinners, She began to move the pieces of the most important chess game of her life. She called Alessandro Monteverdi, the banker who had been discreetly flirting with her for years at Sydney high society parties. She proposed a business dinner, and when Alessandro discovered that Lachlan King's elegant wife was actually a brilliant financier with a groundbreaking investment proposal, he practically fainted. Aurelia told him that night, "If you had known who you were really talking to years ago, I wouldn't have wasted my time talking about footy at those boring dinners." One by one, Aurelia won over allies, building a coalition of investors who saw in Vance International the opportunity to participate in what was being described in financial circles as the most elegant and brutal acquisition in Australian real estate history. But the real satisfaction came when she received a call from Marco the detective. "Mrs. King," he said with a malicious grin, "I have interesting news. Your husband and his mistress had a massive fight last night. The neighbors called the cops because of the racket. Apparently, Ms. Davies discovered something that really pissed her off." Aurelia felt a deep, sweet satisfaction. Her visit to the salon had planted the seeds of panic in Zara's mind, and she had evidently confronted Lachlan, demanding explanations he couldn't give. "What else?" she asked. "Mr. King came out of Ms. Davies' apartment at 3 in the morning. She threw a suitcase out the window at him. A very expensive Louis Vuitton. It smashed right into the windscreen of his Maserati." Aurelia couldn't help but laugh. The image of Lachlan picking up designer underwear from the street while his aristocratic neighbors watched from their balconies was too delicious. But the best was yet to come. 3 days later, Lachlan came home earlier than usual. He poured himself a whiskey with trembling hands and collapsed onto the Italian leather sofa with the expression of a man who had seen his own execution. "Aurelia," he said in a hoarse voice, "we need to talk." She looked at him from the kitchen, where she was calmly preparing a Caesar salad. "What do you want to talk about, Lachlan?" "Us, the divorce, how we're going to split everything." Aurelia sliced a tomato with surgical precision, each movement of the knife deliberate and controlled. "Oh, really? And what makes you think there's anything to split?" Lachlan frowned, confused. "What do you mean? We've been married for 8 years. We have assets. The company." "The company," Aurelia repeated, and for the first time in weeks, she truly smiled. "Yes, let's talk about the company." She walked over to the sofa where Lachlan was sitting, sat elegantly in the chair opposite him, crossed her legs, and looked at him with the expression of a cat that had been playing with a mouse for months and was finally ready to deliver the fatal blow. "Lachlan, my love," she said with a poisonous sweetness, "you know what I discovered while you were busy playing with your little princess? I discovered that I am very, very good at business. So good that in the last few weeks, I've gotten investors willing to buy distressed real estate properties. Properties like, for example, your beloved Barangaroo complex." Lachlan sat up abruptly, spilling whiskey on his silk shirt. "What the hell are you talking about?" "I'm saying, my dear cheating husband, that at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, you're going to receive a buyout offer for all your main developments. An offer you won't be able to refuse because your creditors are nervous, your investors are losing patience, and your cash flow is compromised by the 300 grand you've spent on keeping a mistress." The whiskey glass slipped from Lachlan's hands and shattered on the marble floor. You can't do this." "Can't I?" Aurelia rose with feline grace, walked to the window overlooking the harbor bridge, and contemplated the city lights she had learned to love during 8 years of marriage. "You see, Lachlan, there's something you never knew about me, something you never cared to ask in all these years." She turned to him, and for the first time, Lachlan truly saw the woman he had married. "Before I met you, I was Aurelia Montgomery. You might not recognize the name because you never paid attention to my achievements, but in New York financial circles, that name means something. It means the woman who tripled Blackstone Capital's initial investment in 2 years. It means the youngest financier to be invited to the Goldman Sachs Council. It means the woman who turned down job offers from JP Morgan and Deutsche Bank to create her own company. Lachlan looked at her as if he were seeing a ghost. But then I fell in love with you, Aurelia continued, her voice growing harder with every word. And I made the mistake of believing that love meant sacrificing my identity for yours. I made the mistake of believing that being your wife was enough to make me happy. I made the mistake of trusting that you loved me enough to be faithful. She walked back towards him, and Lachlan could see the fire burning in her blue eyes. But you know what? Thanks to your betrayal, I remembered who I really am. And now, my dear husband, you're about to meet the real Aurelia Vance. The rise of an empress, the Monday morning that would forever change the balance of power in Sydney's elite, dawned with a clear sky and a golden light filtering through the Barangaroo skyscrapers. Aurelia woke up at 5 in the morning, not from anxiety, but from the pure energy coursing through her veins. She dressed for war with the precision of a general preparing for the final battle. She chose a Dolce & Gabbana navy pantsuit that enhanced her eyes and projected absolute authority. Manolo Blahnik heels high enough to intimidate, but comfortable enough to walk confidently through the offices she was about to conquer. Her hair fell in perfect waves over her shoulders, and her makeup was applied with the precision of an artist who knew exactly the effect she wanted to create. As she sipped her morning espresso, Lachlan came downstairs, looking like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. His eyes were sunken, his suit was wrinkled, and his hands trembled slightly as he poured himself a coffee. "Morning, my love," Aurelia said, with a sweetness that contrasted violently with the storm she was about to unleash. "Sleep well?" Lachlan looked at her with a mix of terror and fascination, as if he couldn't believe this imposing and dangerous woman had been his submissive wife for 8 years. "Aurelia, please, can we talk about this? We can find a solution." "Oh, but I already found a solution," she replied, picking up her Hermes handbag and heading for the door. "At 9 o'clock sharp, my lawyer will be at your office with a proposal that is going to change your life forever. I suggest you call yours." She left the penthouse without looking back, leaving Lachlan with his cold coffee and the crushing weight of the realization that he had completely underestimated the woman he had betrayed. At 9 o'clock on the dot, just as she had promised, Donatella Ricci walked into King Development Corporation's offices, accompanied by a retinue that looked like an army of black suits. Lachlan waited for her in the conference room with his own lawyer, an older man named Giuseppe, who had handled the King family's legal affairs for decades, but who now looked completely out of his depth. Donatella wasted no time on pleasantries. She opened her Italian leather briefcase and distributed copies of documents that had been prepared with the precision of surgical instruments designed to dissect empires. "Mr. King," she began, "my client is prepared to make a generous offer for the total acquisition of King Development Corporation." Lachlan looked at those numbers, and his face turned the color of Carrara marble. The offer was technically fair, based on the company's current valuation, but it represented a mere fraction of what the company had been worth a year ago, before his excessive spending and poor management began to take their toll. "This is ridiculous," Giuseppe muttered, adjusting his glasses with trembling hands. "The company is worth much more than this." "Really?" Donatella smiled like a snake that had cornered its prey. "Because according to our financial analysis, King Development has outstanding debts of $8 million, 3 bank loans that expire in the next 6 months, and negative cash flow that has worsened considerably in the last quarter." She held out another document. "Additionally, our investigators have documented the embezzlement of corporate funds worth $300,000, used for personal expenses, unrelated to company operations." Lachlan's face turned even paler. He knew exactly what that meant. Of course, Donatella continued with deadly coldness. My client is willing to overlook these irregularities if the transaction is completed without complications. Otherwise, we would be forced to report these findings to the tax authorities. The trap was perfect, lethal, and inescapable. Lachlan could sell and keep his freedom, or he could resist and face criminal investigations that would ruin him anyway. While this was happening, Aurelia was in her office receiving congratulatory calls from financial contacts all over the world who had heard about her triumphant return to the business world. Alessandro Monteverdi called her to inform her that 3 more banks were interested in financing Vance International's future acquisitions. A reporter from the Financial Review wanted to schedule an interview about the most spectacular comeback in Australian financial history. But the call that excited her the most came at 2 in the afternoon. "Aurelia Vance," a male voice with an American accent asked. "Yes, this is Aurelia. My name is Jonathan Blackstone, from Blackstone Capital in New York." I don't know if you remember, Aurelia almost choked on her espresso. Jonathan Blackstone was a living legend on Wall Street, the man whose firm had been her first great professional success a decade ago. "Of course I remember you, Mr. Blackstone. What can I do for you?" "Actually, it's me who wants to help you. I've been following your moves in Sydney, and I must say I'm impressed. I'd be interested in discussing a strategic partnership between Vance International and Blackstone Capital. I think together we could create something extraordinary in the European market." Aurelia closed her eyes and smiled. It was the final validation, the recognition that she had returned not just as a force to be reckoned with, but as an equal among the giants of international finance. At 4 in the afternoon, Giuseppe called Donatella to report that Lachlan had accepted the offer. The transaction would be completed in 2 weeks, and Aurelia Vance would officially become the owner of everything her ex-husband had built over a 15-year career. But Aurelia had one more surprise up her sleeve. That night, she organized a dinner at Sydney's most exclusive restaurant, inviting all the social elite who had witnessed her humiliation months ago. The invitation, sent on golden engraved cotton paper, simply read, "Aurelia Vance has the honor of inviting you to celebrate new beginnings." She arrived at the restaurant in a Rolls-Royce she had bought that very afternoon, dressed in a Valentino emerald green gown that cost more than most people's cars. Her entrance was majestic, like a queen returning from a long exile to reclaim her throne. The guests received her with a mix of awe, respect, and a little fear. The same women who months ago had looked at her with pity now competed for her attention, knowing that Aurelia Vance was no longer just Lachlan King's ex-wife, but one of the most powerful women in the city. During the dinner, Aurelia was the perfect hostess. Charming, elegant, and witty. She spoke about art, politics, and international business, displaying a sophistication and knowledge she had kept hidden for years, playing the role of trophy wife. But the climax came when she stood up to make a toast. "My friends," she said, her voice filling the room without needing to be raised, "I want to thank you for joining me tonight in what is, without a doubt, the beginning of a new era." She raised her crystal glass, and everyone followed suit. "As many of you know, I've gone through some changes in the last few months, changes that have reminded me of something very important. That sometimes the best things in life arise from the worst betrayals." Several guests exchanged nervous glances, knowing exactly what betrayal she was talking about. "You see," Aurelia continued with a smile that was pure elegance and power, "when a woman discovers that her husband has betrayed her, she has 2 options. She can fall apart and become a victim. Or she can remember that she was never weak to begin with. She can remember that love had temporarily made her forget her own power." Her voice became stronger, more passionate. Tonight, we celebrate not only my return to the business world, but the birth of Vance International, a company that is about to change the European real estate landscape. We celebrate the acquisition of what was once King Development Corporation and the transformation of that company into something bigger, more innovative, and more successful than it ever was. The silence in the restaurant was absolute. Everyone knew they were witnessing something historic. But above all, Aurelia raised her glass higher. We celebrate the fact that a woman who was betrayed didn't break. She multiplied. The applause was deafening, and Aurelia knew she had won not only a company, but the respect and admiration of all of Sydney's elite. As the guests approached her to congratulate her and seek ways to partner with her new firm, Aurelia noticed a familiar figure watching from the restaurant entrance. Lachlan was there, in his wrinkled suit and with a devastated expression, watching the woman he had abandoned for a 24-year-old floozy become the most powerful and influential person in the room. Their eyes met across the crowded hall, and for a moment, time stood still. Lachlan opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but Aurelia simply smiled at him, raised her glass in a silent toast, and turned to continue her conversation with Jonathan Blackstone, who had flown from New York specifically to meet the woman all of Wall Street was talking about. Lachlan stood there for a few more minutes, watching his ex-wife shine like a star at the center of a universe he could no longer touch, and then he left, disappearing into the Sydney night like a ghost of a past that no longer had power over Aurelia's future. The transformation was complete. The Glass Princess had died, and in her place, a diamond empress was born, who would never again allow anyone to underestimate or betray her. The legacy of the Phoenix. 6 months after that night that marked her rebirth, Aurelia Vance was on the terrace of the penthouse she had bought in Sydney's most exclusive building, gazing at a sunrise that painted the city's skyscrapers with gold and pink. Vance International had exceeded all expectations. The partnership with Blackstone Capital had resulted in the acquisition of premium properties in Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane. Forbes magazine had included her on their list of the 50 most powerful women in the Asia-Pacific, and she had received invitations to lecture at Harvard, Wharton, and Oxford on professional reinvention and female empowerment. But this particular morning was special for a different reason. It was the day of the inauguration of her most ambitious project, the transformation of the Barangaroo complex, which had once been Lachlan's pride, into a center for female innovation and entrepreneurship called the Phoenix Center. The Phoenix Center was not just a real estate development. It was a statement. 30 floors of offices, co-working spaces, startup incubators, and an educational center dedicated exclusively to female entrepreneurs with mentorship programs, financing for women-led projects, and a foundation that granted scholarships to young women from low-income families to study careers in finance and technology. Victoria had flown in from London for the inauguration and found Aurelia preparing for the most important day of her new life with the tranquility of a woman who had found her true purpose. "Nervous?" Victoria asked as they sat down to breakfast on the terrace. "Quite the opposite," Aurelia replied, pouring espresso into a Limoges porcelain cup. "I feel as if my whole life has been a preparation for this moment." "And what about Lachlan? Have you heard anything from him?" Aurelia smiled with an expression that mixed satisfaction and a slight sadness. "Marco informed me last week. He's living in a small flat in the suburbs. He works as a consultant for minor real estate firms. His standard of living has dropped considerably." "And Zara?" "Ah, little Zara." Aurelia let out a laugh that sounded like tinkling glass. "It turns out her love was directly proportional to Lachlan's bank balance. When the money ran out, she disappeared too. Now she's dating a footballer from the Sydney Swans. Poor girl. She'll have to find another source of income to maintain her lifestyle. Victoria shook her head. I can't believe she thought she could compete with you. It wasn't a competition, Aurelia corrected, with a wisdom she had paid dearly to acquire. She was young, beautiful, available. She represented everything Lachlan thought he wanted. A woman without complications, without a professional past, without her own ambitions that could overshadow his. I represented responsibility, maturity, a real partnership, and he wasn't ready for that. She stood up and walked to the edge of the terrace, contemplating the city waking up 30 stories below. You know what the most ironic thing about all this is? For 8 years, I tried to be the perfect wife he wanted. I sacrificed my career, my ambitions, my identity to fit his vision of what a married woman should be. And he traded me for someone who was the exact opposite of everything I had tried to be. Victoria walked over and placed a hand on her friend's shoulder. But look at everything you've achieved since then. Look at the woman you've become. I've become who I always was, Aurelia corrected. I'm just no longer afraid to be her. 3 hours later, Aurelia stood on the main podium of the Phoenix Center, in front of an audience of over 500 people that included businesswomen, politicians, journalists, and representatives of Europe's most important feminist organizations. The main auditorium was an architectural masterpiece with glass ceilings that let in natural light, white Carrara marble walls, and a design that combined classic Italian elegance with functional modernity. She wore a white Armani pantsuit that made her shine like a beacon of hope, and when she took the microphone, her voice resonated with the authority of a woman who had earned her place in the world through fire and had emerged strengthened. Ladies, she began, her voice effortlessly filling the auditorium. A year ago, I was a broken woman, a woman who had defined her worth through the approval of a man who, in the end, proved to be unworthy of her sacrifice. A murmur of recognition ran through the audience. Many of the women present had lived similar stories. A year ago, I believed that love meant making yourself small so that another person could shine brighter. I believed that being a good wife meant giving up my own dreams. I believed that my happiness depended on keeping someone else happy, even at the cost of my own fulfillment. Her voice grew stronger, more passionate. But betrayal, however painful, is sometimes the greatest gift life can give us, because it forces us to confront who we really are when we have no one else to lean on except ourselves. Applause began spontaneously, but Aurelia raised a hand to continue. The Phoenix Center isn't just a building, it's a symbol. It's physical proof that when a woman has been destroyed, she can rise from the ashes of her broken life and create something more beautiful, more powerful, and more meaningful than she ever imagined possible. She paused, letting her words sink into every heart present. Every one of you here today has faced moments where the world told you that you weren't enough, that you were too ambitious, too complicated, too smart, too independent, that you should settle for less than you deserved to make others comfortable. Her voice cracked slightly, not from weakness, but from the genuine emotion of a woman who had found her life's mission. But I'm here to tell you that others' opinions of you are irrelevant. A man's betrayal doesn't define your value. Abandonment doesn't diminish your power. And rejection doesn't reduce your ability to create empires. The applause intensified, and Aurelia could see tears in the eyes of many women in the audience. This center, she continued, gesturing towards the marble walls, is built on the foundations of my failed marriage. Every office, every classroom, every workspace represents a piece of my broken heart that was transformed into determination. Every mentorship program we offer here was born from the pain of being underestimated, Every scholarship we grant arises from the fury of being betrayed. But I didn't build this place for revenge. I built it for freedom. The freedom to be completely yourselves, without apology, without compromise, without fear. The freedom to fail and get back up. The freedom to succeed without feeling guilty. The freedom to be powerful without being called aggressive. The freedom to be vulnerable without being called weak. The silence in the auditorium was absolute, charged with a palpable energy. 6 months ago, I received a call. It was Lachlan, my ex-husband. He wanted us to meet for coffee. Talk like civilized adults, as he put it. He wanted to apologize, explain his actions, and ask me to consider giving him a second chance. A nervous murmur ran through the audience. They all wanted to know what she had answered. "Do you know what I told him?" Aurelia smiled, and her smile was radiant, free, completely at peace. I said thank you. I thanked him for betraying me. I thanked him for showing me who he really was. I thanked him for forcing me to rediscover my own strength. The applause erupted like a storm, but Aurelia wasn't finished. And then I told him something else. I said, "Lachlan, I am no longer the woman you fell in love with, and I'm definitely not the woman you betrayed. I am someone completely new, someone stronger, freer, and more complete than I ever was with you. And that woman has no room in her life for men who can't recognize her worth." The ovation was deafening. Women on their feet applauded with tears streaming down their cheeks, recognizing in Aurelia their own dormant strength. When the applause finally died down, Aurelia lowered her voice for her final reflection. "My sisters," she said, with an intimacy that reached every heart present. "I want you to remember something very important when you leave here today. Your value is not determined by who loves you, but by how you love yourselves. Your power doesn't come from others' approval, but from confidence in your own abilities. Your freedom isn't something someone can give or take away. It's something you reclaim every day by choosing to be authentic with yourselves." She turned to leave the podium, but stopped for one last declaration. "And if one day a man betrays you, abandons you, or underestimates you, remember this: he isn't rejecting you. He is revealing his own inability to recognize a diamond when it's right in his hands. And when a man can't recognize your worth, that's his problem, not yours." The final ovation lasted 15 minutes. When Aurelia finally left the auditorium, she was surrounded by dozens of women who wanted to thank her, share their own stories, and ask for advice. Every hug, every shared tear, every smile of recognition confirmed that she had found her true purpose in life. That night, after a reception that lasted until the early hours, Aurelia returned to her penthouse alone. She poured herself a glass of Dom Perignon champagne, took off her shoes, and went out to her private terrace. Sydney shone before her like a sea of diamonds. The lights of the harbor bridge, the skyscrapers of Barangaroo, and the winding streets of the city created a luminous tapestry that reminded her why she had fallen in love with this city 10 years ago. Her phone vibrated with a text message. It was from a number she didn't recognize, but when she read the content, she smiled. "Aurelia, it's Zara. I saw the news about your center. I wanted to apologize for everything that happened. I understand who you really are now, and I'm embarrassed that I ever thought I could compete with you. You're an inspiration." Aurelia stared at the message for a long moment. Then she deleted it without replying. Not out of cruelty, but because that part of her life was in the past. Zara, Lachlan, the pain, the betrayal, the humiliation. It had all served its purpose. It had led her to this moment, to this version of herself that was more powerful than she had ever imagined possible. She raised her glass to the starry Sydney sky and toasted silently to the woman she had been, to the pain that had strengthened her, and to the extraordinary life that stretched out before her like an infinite promise of possibilities. In the distance, the chimes of a nearby church marked midnight. A new day was beginning, and with it, new adventures for the woman who had learned that the greatest betrayal a woman can suffer is not that of a man who abandons her, but that of abandoning herself for someone else's love. Aurelia Vance had chosen to never betray herself again, and in that choice, she had found the purest, most powerful freedom that exists, the freedom to be completely, unequivocally, magnificently herself. Did you love this story of overcoming betrayal and finding your inner strength? Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories that'll inspire you to never give up. Down in the comments, tell us, what would you have done in Aurelia's place? We want to hear your thoughts.